I think one way to think about Catalyst is you're on the edge of this valley of death, looking in, and you have a bunch of people on the edge, and they're all looking in and asking themselves, what should we pull out, right? What's worth pulling out? And there's so many potential projects. There's ideas are in abundance, and capital is of course constrained. And so what we want to help is create a system that allows every individual who wants to participate to be able to pull projects out of that valley of death and help them continue on.
All right. So super excited to kick off a conversation with you guys today. This episode of the DeSci podcast is all focused on really molecule catalyst and sharing some perspective, right, on the journey to how we got here. But before we dig into all of that, super excited to share the problems that we're trying to solve in the DeSci space. I think everyone here has been in the space for a while or has touched it in some capacity. And so looking forward to having some discussion around that as well. Before we jump in, I would love to just do some quick intros. So Benji, why don't we start with you?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, so my foray into DeSci was kind of random. So, I mean, my training is in biotech. I worked in like the synthetic biology space for a bit in an academic setting. So, I was in a lab there during school. I realized that academic research, while super interesting and deep and transformative, it really wasn't my pace. I wanted something kind of faster moving. And so I joined a diagnostics company in the cancer space. And, that was definitely much more my pace. Basically, it was computational biology. So the rate at which you could do discovery was the rate at which you could, come up with ideas for data analyses and run them, which was super fun. But yeah, so I worked at a cancer diagnostics company. Doctors would send us their patients' tumors. We would do DNA and RNA sequencing on them. And then we would basically try and come up with treatment recommendations. And so it was super impactful work. I really enjoyed basically the kind of playground that you came to every day just to study all of the data. Of course, it's morbid, it's oncology, and you're dealing with patients whose lives are really at risk. But at the same time, when you remove the personal aspect of it, you can really get into the data elements of it and really study it as more of a puzzle. And so I found the work incredibly interesting. I think what bothered me while I was there was how much money we were making off of patients' data without them seeing the value. And so at the same time, I was starting to get more into crypto as just, as a kind of side hobby. But I started to be able to see kind of the potential intersections of the two fields and realized that a lot of the problems that we were facing were actually incentive problems. So, we would try and get doctors to tell us, how did their patients do? We made a recommendation of the treatment. How did the patients actually do on the back end? And we struggled to incentivize them to give us that follow-up data. And I started to realize, oh, like if they had, a piece of the pie, then they would care more about the quality of the data that's being generated, not just use us and then, go off and do their own thing. So, I was really looking for these kind of intersections between blockchain and biotech for a long time. And I saw a bunch of projects, emerge that were really exciting, but never really break out. And, now that I'm here, I realize how hard it really is. But so I started to kind of look for different ways to find this intersection. I joined a venture fund for about a year. And, 3 months into joining this venture fund, I came across Molecule's deck. It was sent by one of Molecule's investors. And I realized that really one of the great potential applications of NFTs was to biotech IP. And how many of the issues that people have with big pharma are around the fact that, you know, biotech IP is monopolized. And, blockchain has this incredible democratizing force that could potentially democratize this really valuable, very centralized asset. So I got super excited, so excited that I joined. And yeah, I've worked at various roles at Molecule and I'm now doing operations. So yeah, thanks. Sorry for the long intro.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. I think, for us, we're definitely gonna touch on some of your experiences and dig into that, that journey, Benji. So appreciate you going a little bit deeper. Kevin, would love to hear your background, how you
Yes.
got to Molecule.
Happy to. Same story. Actually, quite quite an accident that I stumbled upon blockchain and crypto in the first place. Came during my times at the university, so I'm coming from a computer science and economics background. And during my master's, I actually discovered Bitcoin and the underlying tech blockchain, and I was so fascinated by the primitives that this technology can bring and the promise that it inherits, that it still has to fulfill to a degree. But yeah, it never stopped after. So for me, this was something where I then decided to dedicate my career to it as well. Started off working in fintech, so basically building financial products based on the blockchain. Really, I would say rather boring stuff, regulated crypto custody, regulated crypto brokerage. But the intent was always to go a bit deeper into Web3 as well. Started to explore the NFT space a bit more because I do think that there's a lot of value to it as well. I don't 100% agree with where the NFT space is headed at the moment. I think the PFP hype and everything kind of took a bit of a different track, a bit of a track with regards to, yeah, speculation, trying to build these little communities. So I think this is where like I discovered DeSci and I discovered Molecule. And just the primitive of the IP NFT just made so much sense to me. Like it made click when I saw this and thought really like this is something where there's actually value for the real world, right? It's not just this little ecosystem that benefits from it that potentially gets some gains, but this could really advance humanity and have an impact on the world. And this is where I was so fascinated with it. And then just got in touch, got quite quickly, got to know the team, the amazing team that I'm working with on a day-to-day basis. And thereafter it was a no-brainer. I got offered the opportunity to join as a head of product, and then never looked back. And I think the work we're doing is important. We're very early in the space, but I think we really have a way to shape the landscape of DeSci and also just bring forward this technology in a context that actually makes sense and actually helps humanity.
Yeah, definitely. I know, I think your background and perspective in the NFT space, fintech space, is really serves a great foundation for us. And I know you've brought a lot of really good perspective to building out our product as it is today and really think about the future roadmap of what that product looks like. So excited to dig in that a bit more. Quick background on me. So I would say maybe took a bit of a long journey. So going way back in university, I originally thought I wanted to be a pharmacist, and I spent some time shadowing some actual retail pharmacists, and I realized really quickly that wasn't for me. So switched out of a pharmacy program in university and switched to business. One thing that was super interesting about my business journey, I would say, is I spent a lot of time in consumer packaged goods. So I actually spent some time working at Domino's Pizza at their corporate headquarters as an internship. And then I spent some time with PepsiCo, working specifically on the Frito-Lay side of things. And I had a really hard time in the consumer packaged goods space because a lot of what I was realizing was, I wanted to help people. And a lot of what I was selling and people were consuming actually wasn't really healthy for you and was contributing to a lot of the problems, right, that we have today, obesity, diabetes. And so, yeah, for me, I really wanted to get back to helping people. That's, when I think about the degree I wanted to have, it really hinged on helping people. I just had to find my way. I went from consumer packaged goods actually over to big pharma, and I spent 5.5 years working in the big pharma space in a marketing capacity, but I worked to bring 2 new drugs to market and got to see firsthand all that goes into really getting a drug to market, working with the FDA, finalizing a label, really working to figure out the marketing strategy, developing materials for patients, for doctors, for insurance companies. And to Benji's point, I realized really quickly how complicated that system is. And a lot of time and energy and resources goes into actually getting a medication approved and all the way to a patient. So, for me, I realized though that there is a lot of impact in that, hearing the impact stories, hearing the time that you can give people, the more memories, more quality of life. I worked in the neuroscience and oncology space, so that, similar to Benji, that really hit home for me. But I also realized that it's a really complicated system, right? And a lot of that stuff takes time, money, resources, and there's no guarantee. So I got to see firsthand teams dismantled overnight because we didn't get the positive data that we needed in our clinical trials. And so the pure devastation, right, of people who had worked on something for 10, 15 years from lab all the way to getting it so close to commercialization just absolutely, disbanded based on one clinical trial reading. So, for me, I realize how capital heavy and how resource heavy, right? Just getting one drug all the way to market is. So, for me, after being in that space for 5.5 years, I really wanted to think about how technology and new infrastructure, right, could help advance the way that we do things. I spent a few years working in the DeFi space, really thinking about building the new financial rails, working on a couple layer ones. And then for me, I stumbled upon, similar to the team here, stumbled upon Molecule, and it brought together the best of what blockchain and this crypto infrastructure could offer, and paired that with biotech and drug development. And for me, it really took a lot of the best of both worlds and put it together, but in a really clear way of where we could have impact and really help advance the technology and the science and the impact on humanity. So super excited to be here and excited to help continue to advance that mission.
Sorry, super quickly, just as you were giving your intro, I thought of two things that I thought might be interesting. So check this out. So um, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but this is a Brian Johnson post. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Brian Johnson. He's like a longevity kind of freak of nature that is taking Twitter by storm. But he developed what he calls the genocide leaderboard. And I mean, you were talking about like PepsiCo and just like with CPGs, how you're basically like, I mean, there's Frito-Lay right there, like number four. But it's basically like, for every dollar you spend, how much time does that take off your life? How much revenue are they making? And therefore, like, how much of a cost on time are they to society? And so, I mean, it's just an interesting way to think about the goods that you buy, and also like where you put your own energy. Like, are you going to be on the, red side of this leaderboard or on the green side of this leaderboard? And of course, we're trying to be on the green side, but just an interesting way to think about, where you put your energy, and like, which side of the leaderboard are you on here? And it was just, interesting to hear your perspective. But yeah, something else that came to mind.
I would say too, real quick, Benji, it's definitely like working in that space. There's a lot of initiatives that they're doing to improve the products that they offer, health, less, refined products, etc. So there is a ton going on both sides of the coin. But for me, like getting up every day and knowing how it felt, the difference between, potato chips and pizza, and hearing patients talk about like really like I want to be at my daughter's graduation. I want to be at her wedding. I want to see my grandbabies grow up. Like I think there's a space for everyone, and we need both of those products, right? Like we need all of that for society. But yeah, to your point, I found myself so much more intrinsically motivated to be on, the other side of that chart. So, but yeah, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, 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 all good. And I think one other thing is when you were talking about just programs being dropped, where so much time and effort has been put into it. It really is this kind of like, from a company perspective, if you're a big pharma and you keep investing resources, it's kind of like this sunk cost bias. But at the same time, if you think about what an organization is, it's just a bunch of individuals, right? And if those individuals know that their job is on the line, if the data doesn't look a certain way, it probably changes the way they look at that data, right? And the types of, vendors and contract research organizations they work with, because they know that, certain ones will help them keep their own job. And so you have to think, how much does like how much of a principal agent problem exists within pharma, just because, the individuals want to keep their job within certain programs. So how does that change their behavior? What is the result of that on like how capital gets spent in the biotech space? Something that's like really interesting to look at, especially in the context of DeSci, because in DeSci, people are working on assets, or like, individual research programs individually, right? And so if one program gets dropped, really it's not the end of the world for that person, because they're only fractionally working on that job. Versus at a big pharma, asset gets dropped, it's like you have to go job hunting again. So, I think one of the criticisms we've had is, in DeSci, that people aren't all in on one specific program. But then again, like if you're a human who's trying to hedge your own career, it's to your benefit to like not have all your eggs in one basket. And so, but at the same time, you're not going to put all of your effort into each individual program. So really, it will be interesting to see what is the sweet spot of like personal comfort you can have making rational decisions because you have irons and enough fires, but also be motivated enough to put in enough effort to actually drive individual projects forward. I don't know if that is tracking, but yeah, something to
Yeah,
think.
no. I mean, I definitely think for me, like being on the other side of that coin and seeing the need for like uh diversifying and like really there's risk in drug development. I mean, that's just like innate in how it works. But how can you lessen that risk and be smart and be more agile and be, to me, I think DeSci is, the goal in my mind would be to have it be walking hand in hand with, big pharma and finding ways that we could help advance the initiatives that they have more early stage and let us do some of the, early work and then maybe, passing it or partnering together to get something all the way through to the end stage. Really from like like a prioritization standpoint too, I know that I would love to see people be able to express the different areas where they want to advance research. I know certainly pharma has initiatives in place and I am someone who's like grateful for a lot of the work that they do, but also we should be able to have a say in, maybe the areas that aren't as um, much of a priority to them, but as the end consumer, right? Like at the end of the day, we're the ones who are going to use those medications, use those treatments, use those diagnostics, and so I would love to be able to help shape that. But to your point, Benji, like I see it as a you know a risk exercise, and how can we get more breadth in the early stages to then have more stuff that's going into that funnel. And to your point, like professionally, right? There's even for like the researchers, I would imagine there's kind of the areas that are priority for them for their career, but there might be passion project areas. So giving them an outlet to advance other agendas that might not be, the ones that, maybe professionally are their priority, but maybe there's other ones. But yeah, I think to your point, what you're saying is spot on. And going back to just really and truly how resource heavy drug development is. And, there's even examples of, when I was working in pharma, like we got actual early FDA clearance on something. And then when we got to more advanced data, it didn't prove out. And so, you can even have times where there's something that actually gets to patients and you actually have to take it back just based on how the data progresses. So really accelerating, right? Like the science and the innovation and giving more people more options and avenues, I think would benefit people, would benefit researchers, society, and pharma, right? Like the whole system. But yeah, I'm with you on that. With you on that.
Yeah, just to maybe add on this as well, right? I think this was one of the biggest learnings for me when joining the DeSci space and molecule in particular was just to learn on all of the shortcomings of the current system. So really, how much research and how much discovery actually doesn't lead to anything. And I know we're probably going to talk about this a bit, like the valley of death, like how much time researchers spending on actually trying to secure the funding to keep their research projects alive. And this time actually means less time in the lab, right? Running experiments, trying to develop the drug, trying to foster more research that progresses it. And I think this is something where, for me, this was also an aha moment where DeSci actually can play a key role. And our product catalyst that we're going to introduce later on is just how much we can help the space, and that we can actually propose an alternative way for researchers to look into how can I myself as a researcher focus on what I can do best, which is the research itself, and trying to use this decentralized system, which is blockchain, to help me actually secure the funding for my research. So actually building a community around the research topic that I care about, and then a group of people cares about. And I think this was really something after speaking with Benji as well, and something that I learned where it just clicked for me. And this is I think one of the key problems we're trying to address in the space is just to develop this further and provide this alternative. So I think, yeah, coming outside of biotech was really the kicker for me to see that there are these flaws that are just existing, and I think we have a really good shot at trying to solve this.
Kevin, I think your remarks really make a nice segue into the Valley of Death. And it is worth spending some time on what that is. I know it's something that we are all familiar with because we've either worked in it previously or we're building solutions to try and overcome it. But I don't know that it's as widely understood for everybody. So, Benji, there's probably no better person to take that one. Can you, really dig into what is the Valley of Death and how that impacts research and research funding?
Hmm. Absolutely. So you could think of drug development as a funnel, right? You have m basically all of biochemical space that hypothetically could be a therapeutic, right? And the process of drug development is filtering that funnel to a few lead candidates for being therapeutics that would be useful for disease, that, can cure a disease but not, harm the person. Really, what you're trying to do in drug discovery is find an application for, some matter that is basically more therapeutic than it is toxic, right? And that whole process is super cost intensive. People report numbers up to like $2.5 billion just to do that process one time. And, we can debate what that exact number it is, but it's a big number, right? And where it starts with at the top of the funnel is with government funding of academic research. And the reason it's government funded is because number one, there's taxpayer dollars that are allocated to it. And number two is because the return on investment is really low. I mean, it's not necessarily negative. I actually don't know the exact number of like what the IRR, the internal rate of return to the government is, but it's not something that would attract a private investor because the research discoveries are just hard to make. It's a lot of trial and error. You have to study a lot of different, you know, protein-protein interactions and pathways and different disease models in order to find signal that is worth pursuing. And so it's a really, really capital intensive process. It's funded to, by governments to the tune of tens of billions per year globally. Um, and then once discoveries are made, comes this, quote unquote, valley of death, which is this period where um, you basically have this gap in funding from governments where they, say, okay, this looks too much like, a potential company for us to continue to fund it. But for the, venture investors who are risk takers, they might not be willing to take a certain level of risk that is needed in order to push a project forward. So this isn't to say that it's necessarily a bad use of resources, but for that class of investor, it's not like sufficiently attractive enough to put money into that. And that's where we're trying to play. But on the other side of the valley of death is massive, massive private equity capital markets. So this is, venture capital in biotech, which also funds drugs to the tunes of tens of billions per year, but really looks for a specific risk profile in order to generate the returns necessary to justify that investment to limited partners who give the venture funds their money. So really where we're trying to play is in this space where it's too risky for a venture investor, but too late stage for the government and grant funding bodies to fund. So that's really what the Valley of Death is. It's just this underfunded kind of stage of science project that really I think DeSci has the opportunity to disrupt. Um, and so yeah, I mean it's some people talk about it like it's the worst thing in the world. You know, I think it's important to understand like this is capitalism doing its thing, right? But capitalism is clearly limited by capital. And so now that you have this new capital pool, what can you do with it? You could potentially supplement where existing capital pools have failed. And so you have this very, very high risk appetite pool of capital that's currently putting funding toward meme coins and NFTs and things that people would argue don't have intrinsic value. And what we're trying to say is, hey, there is this high risk but very, very impactful potential class of projects that could get funded by this capital pool. Is anyone interested in doing it? And that's really what Molecule's trying to do. So what we're trying to do with the products we develop, and really that's what we're all about. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, a big aha moment in joining the space and the team was the first time I connected with a researcher because it's real. Like the projects that they're working on, the ideas that they have, the you know, even the insights that they're building these research projects around are real. And so for me, you know, really knowing that when we talk about the valley of death and getting over this, you know, hurdle to advance research enough that where someone would want to continue to invest in it, I think sometimes it can feel non-personal, right? But like when you sit and you talk to people and you hear the insights that they have or the learnings that they have and the research that they want to do, the projects that they want to fund, like it's real stuff and real impact that could, you know, impact people's lives down the road. So yeah, I don't know. I think sometimes when we talk about the valley of death, we don't, it's like a blanket statement. And really, for me, the light came on big time being in this space, getting to meet with the researchers, hearing the ideas, and giving people the opportunity to be invited into that process. Because I think today, you know, maybe you guys know, but right now it's hard. It's not easy to get involved in these budding ideas. I think for me, the probably the closest experience I had was when I was in school, you know, working across other areas of the university. You know, maybe it was with the engineering team and they had, you know, found something in their studies and we would work together to develop a marketing plan around it with the business school. But outside of the university, it's hard. I don't know. Would you guys agree with that? Like, are there easy ways for people to get involved in projects at this stage?
Personally, I would say no. It's incredibly difficult, and I think this is just a nature of, working in science. I mean, science is really all about keeping your data close to your chest until you feel that you're ready to present it. People aren't excited about putting out data that they don't know how to interpret, right? They want to create a story around it. That's what helps them get published. That's where all the incentives lie, right? So there really isn't quite an incentive yet to put out something, a half-baked idea and data set, and invite others to come in and say, "Hey, can you help me, make sense of this and tell me what direction to go in next?" But the way the system is set up, it's, really not incentivizing for, you know, decentrally attracting a ton of, talent from around the world to come in and look at your half-baked idea, but rather keep it close to your chest and then come out all at once, with a complete story. But anyway, so that's kind of what I found.
Yeah, I think from my side, I mean, I can't comment too much on biotech research, right? But what I'm feeling and what I think we can also achieve within DeSci and within Molecule is that, again, right, the lesson that I learned here was most of the drugs that actually make it to the market or are supposed to make it to the market have to be profitable for people to actually keep developing it for farmer to put the money in, because it's such a long process. It takes a long time. It's very capital intensive, and you don't have a lot of time to profit then based on the patent that you have, right? Like you have to develop it. It goes through all of these processes, and in the end, you have 4, 5, maybe 6 years to actually yeah, earn back this money that you put into the research. And I think for us, and this is something where I feel DeSci has a lot to offer, is like you can bring these groups of patients together that deeply care about a certain disease that may not be the most profitable one, because maybe not a lot of people are actually suffering from disease, but it still allows these patients to come together, form the community, find research that is targeting these areas, and give them the opportunity to find this and help find a cure. So I think this is just something where, like, people that really deeply care about seeing this drug come to market have a way to come together, give feedback, provide funding, provide other resources to get this to the market. And I think this is just yeah, something really really inspiring, and that also helped me to really believe in this mission. And I think this is just, yeah, quite different to the current system that we have to deal with.
Yeah, you know, I think it's really interesting the thinking about so many different sides of the coin. I mean, I guess a coin only has two sides, but um, I would say like giving people a way to express their opinions. I have kiddos, and so now that like I am a parent, I feel like there's so many different things that I have become interested in terms of like my own health or thinking about my kids' health. And I, you know, to have a way where I could directly say like I'm interested in XYZ and be able to, you know, go have an actual impact, like a tangible impact there is really profound. You know, I've had friends who have had kids who've had special needs, and all of a sudden, there are things that you didn't know that life would kind of serve you up, but now it's can become your reality. And I know a lot of them have gone to the ends of the earth to find support groups and ways that they can give funding to, really, really rare genetic conditions and things that like didn't matter, not to say didn't matter, but didn't impact them before, that overnight now there's nothing more impactful. There's nothing that they're more interested in. And what is not necessarily maybe on a big company's radar is their whole radar screen. So to your point, Kevin, like, I don't know, giving people the opportunity to express interests and passions, I I think there's no greater work, no greater opportunity. The other side of that too is like a lot of times pharma companies maybe find something in a lab and don't necessarily have all of the resources to get a compound to a certain point, and they actually like sell it and then let someone else develop it, and then if it gets to a certain point and it's interesting, they bring it back in house, they buy it back. So there's a lot of like development strategies that they have, and also right like acquisition strategies that they have for compounds that get to a certain point. So it just really opens up the market in a much more, there's like the business side of that, right, and also giving people the personal side of that, where I feel like today a lot of it is maybe more like donations or grants that you can contribute to, but you play a really different role in that process, as opposed to being like directly involved, which is probably a good area for us to talk about. I know a lot of what we're discussing here is incentives and like realigning incentives between a lot of different parties. And some of what I think we are really trying to do here is using intellectual property, right, as a way to align incentives between a lot of different parties. Would love to hear, Kevin, maybe we start with you, how intellectual property is really becoming like a tool or a mechanism for us to realign incentives and bring people together around an idea where I believe to Benji's point earlier, a lot of that was really kept. I think the tendency is to keep that close to chest. And so by bringing that out and putting it out in the open and bringing that on chain, what could that mean for aligning incentives and rallying people around an idea?
Yeah, for sure. So I think this kind of boils down also to the underlying technology that we're using, which is blockchain, right? It makes it so much easier for people to build communities, and we've seen this with our own DAO space, right? People are gathering around a certain vertical within the science space, whether it's be like longevity, hair loss, you name it, and people have a common vision to help solve this. And I think just the underlying primitives that we are leveraging from blockchain, like this decentralized nature, decentralized trust, immutability, transparency, I think are just helping how people are actually able to like organize around a common goal and actually also achieve this, right? And our vision at Molecule is to be able to help these primitives to live on chain. One of them, of course, as Jillian, as you mentioned, is the IP NFT. Of course, NFT always have a bit of a negative connotation, but for us, it's really about bringing this non-fungible token on chain that attaches the research IP to smart contracts. So it actually is visible on chain, and people see that it is something that is there and attached. And I think this is just something that we can build on top on. And it's not just for us. Like we of course are providing, let's say, the technical foundations for it, but it's not just this, right? It's also the legal work that our team is putting into this, trying to come up with a contract structure and basically primitives that help people bring IP on chain. And this IP is then basically the core of it, right? Like we want to have this core and build everything around this, whether it is the IP tokens that we're building on top, whether it is the DAOs that are being built on top that have these IP portfolios in the end that are directed at certain research areas. And I think also, yeah, just the way like this community comes together and really just goes on this common goal and tries to achieve solving it in a way. So I think this is just where we as Molecule really play a crucial role within shaping the overall DeSci space. And we're still early. And I know this is a very common thing to say in crypto. Everyone says we're very early, but I think for us this is actually quite true. And yeah, I think we have a lot of work in front of us, but I think we're on the right track. and it's really just bringing more value to these assets. We started off, we've done the initial round, but I think there's much more we can do to improve this, even make it easier for people to put IP on chain, and really become this layer where IP can be governed on chain for everyone to see, to govern, and of course also more or less for some people to control it. But this is where I see a lot of value that Molecule can bring.
So, kind of digging into that a bit more, what would you guys say makes IP the perfect kind of use case for bringing together, right? Like crypto, these primitives that we're building, and something in the real world, like in, it's an idea that exists, and how, I guess, what makes IP like the perfect kind of place to start to bring something on chain. Maybe Benji, you'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I've thought about this one a ton. And frankly, I always questioned, why not put things like your house on chain and tokenize your house, right? And it seems to make sense because then, you can basically hedge the value of your property by, making an NFT out of your house deed and sharing the ownership with a bunch of other people. Like to me, that conceptually made sense until you start to ask the hard questions of, okay, what if your house burns down? What if somebody just comes in and steals your house and squats it, right? There are difficult things to measure in the real world and bring them on chain. It's called like the Oracle problem. And, other groups are trying to solve that one. But what makes intangible assets, things that you can't touch, like IP, such a good use case is because they are like ephemeral. They don't, though they are real world, they are not physical. So basically, what IP is it's this intangible right granted to you by the government, saying, "Hey, we will protect you against anyone else making your thing." That's a promise, and so we're basically making a representation of that promise on chain. So because a promise, can't get stolen or squatted or burnt down, right? A promise is just, a guarantee by the government. It's much easier to tokenize than a physical real world asset. So that's kind of what clicked for me. It's like, oh, digital asset works perfectly with like an intangible asset, right? So I think, yeah, this is where things started to click for me. If, oh, IP is the perfect use case for digital assets because it doesn't suffer from the Oracle problem, right? You can just take this right, assign it to a token, and you're good to go. You're off to the races, and you can trade those rights. You can share them with others. You can track their ownership in a completely transparent way. You can fundraise for them, right? Like the question of why blockchain becomes much easier to start answering.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think IPs is the perfect, or one of the perfect examples on how to put real world assets on chain. I think another thing to notice is right, like this IP, as Benji mentioned previously, it was about like holding tight to your research, to data, and I think it's also a way for researchers or the IP NFT holder to hedge or de-risk, right? Like as Benji mentioned, you can basically have the ability to trade part of the IP in a form of, for example, IP tokens, right, that grant governance right to other parties that are interested in helping to advance this research one way or another. So it becomes this not just isolated thing that is the IP that people are trying to advance, but it becomes like this community of people that are trying to bring this forward, because the underlying asset, the IP NFT, is the core of it. And in theory, like if you mention right, it's a lot of capital that goes into this. The value of it is in theory quite high if there is an actual drug out of this. So it becomes something where you're also able to hedge this in a sense, because you're not the only one that's just holding on to it, but you're allowing people to come in and help foster this, and then this becomes more of a collaboration to help advance the IP and find cures.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really interesting to take the thing that people want to hold the closest to the chest and really take that idea and flip it on its head and use it as an invitation to get people to collaborate and rally around an idea and develop community. I think, using blockchain not only when you think about like a real idea and taking that and bringing it on chain, but also like using the mechanisms and the forces that we know so well in crypto and Web3, and using that to build community. And the power of that is really, really powerful. And I think something that we're hoping to, unleash the power of ourselves.
I would kind of question that, Jillian. I think it's a good point to dig into, right? Because you're right in that IP is something that people want to hold close to their chest, but I think that's just a product of the system that they're in. I think scientists by nature want to collaborate. I think if you talk to any scientist, the most fun they have in research is finding somebody else who finds value in their work and can add to that value in a positive some way, in a way that, the crypto space is very used to, like this positive sum mentality, airdrops, basically bringing others in who appreciate what you do and want to co-create value with you. I think the reason why people do want to keep IP so close to their chest now is because the transaction costs are so high, right? And so if you can bring the transaction costs way down, now all of a sudden you can actually tap into the desires of scientists really, which are to collaborate and to create, something meaningful. And we all know that more meaningful things will get created if more minds and energy is being put toward them by a diverse, hive mind. But really, I think people do want to share their IP. They just, in the system that we have now, they really can't afford to.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Benji. And I think taking a step back and thinking about the system that has created those dynamics is something that I don't feel like we do that often, but really important. And reimagining that system, and coming up with ways that complement that system. I know that we would love to build an entirely new system, but I think the reality is we have to find ways that these systems can complement one another and can work well together, because I don't think the system's going to go way overnight by any means. We're talking about infrastructure and indices that have been in the making for 100 years, if not maybe longer. But yeah, finding ways that these systems can complement and grow right together. I think for me, one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is like making science more inclusive and inviting. And it kind of touches on, Benji, like what you're talking about, collaborating around an idea. Would just love to kind of hear from you guys, like where we are today and how we could get better at that. And I would say too, like maybe different things that we've learned on our journey of building in the DeSci space. And yeah, like any experiments that we've run or things that we've tried to really jumpstart this DeSci movement, invite people in, have people start to build communities, and the data points that we've gathered along the way in those experiments.
Yeah, I can start. So where we've really experimented quite heavily at this point is in decentralized funding. So really, it's not DeSci in the sense that you have a bunch of people participating in the science, but rather decentralized financing of a science project, which actually still remains to be relatively executed by, or pretty much executed by only a few individuals. So I think where we have a lot of room to grow is creating incentives and inviting people into contributing to the research itself. And I think a lot of it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, which is we are fighting a system that's, heavily ingrained in a culture of keeping, data and IP close to your chest, rather than being excited about inviting other people and realizing that there's this potential positive sum nature of doing so. And so I think where we're struggling and where we have a lot to figure out is in how to basically in success cases of showing that, you know, decentralized science is actually more efficient and because you have more brain power going toward a project that would otherwise have limited brain power going toward it, and how different perspectives and decentralized incentives can actually increase the value of the research product. So I think we've kind of shown that you can decentrally fund science. It's, not an impossible ask. It's hard. We're still struggling. But what's even harder, but actually more important to show, is that you can do better science, right? And I think until we get there, a lot of people, especially scientists, will question this whole space and they'll say, where are the success cases? You know, you funded these projects, what's come of it? And until we can answer that question with specific case studies and say, we decentrally funded this project, we decentrally operated this project, and it became a success, and success as measured by licensing, startup, founding from the IP, etc., we're really in a tough place, right? Because yeah, we really can't just prove one pillar. We have to kind of show end-to-end success in order for people to really take us seriously. And, you know, it's something that we're trying to figure out. Not an easy problem because, like you said, it's a technological problem. It's also a cultural challenge. So, yeah, but, you know, really, I think on the other side of it is really this beautiful system of, you know, crowdfunding and crowd executing of research. And, you know, it looks like hackathons, it looks like bounties, and it kind of looks like Kaggle maybe, if you guys are familiar. Um, but, you know, we have a lot of work on that front to prove out that we can create that system and that system can create, you know, valuable research.
And maybe just to add on this, I think what we are all quite aware of, working within the spaces, is that we need to have a long haul. Is that how you say it in English? Sorry, not a native speaker, but you know what I mean. So I think it's definitely the long game. I'll try to rephrase it. The long game that we're playing, and I 100% agree with Benji what he's saying. I think we have a pretty good analogy within the company of how we're approaching things, right? Like we can't solve all of the problems at once, so we need to focus on one step at a time. And what we're trying to build is this cockpit, right? And the funding, as Benji mentioned, for us is like the start of the engine. But there's a lot more to it, right? Like you still need to take off, you need to fly, and you actually need to land the thing. But this takes time. So I think for us, this is where we are seeing the most value at the moment. Just providing this funding aspect to researchers, trying to give them a different way of funding their research, being able to focus on what they do best, which is being in the lab, advancing the science, and us trying to bring these tools to them. But I agree 100% that we need these success stories. But this will, of course, take some time to get them to the whole system. But nonetheless, we're very bullish on what we're doing. That's why we're all here. That's why we put in so much work every day. And I think this is exactly why the team is, yeah, so great, because everyone is so great, so dedicated on the mission, and we're just getting started.
I think it's kind of fun too to think about what we're doing as like going back to the roots. I know when like you think about the history of science and how it's developed, a lot of it was born in the shadows of somebody really having an idea that they were maybe tinkering around with on their own or experimenting in their own house or shop, like, you know, I'm talking many moons ago. And then getting people to rally around that experiment or that idea and then keep pushing it forward and keep pushing it forward to then bring it to the masses. And it's like going back to the roots of the experimental nature of what science was born out of and getting people in that cockpit and jump starting that engine to bring science to the masses. So I don't know, it's a lot of fun to think about like going way back to the days of like, you know, I don't want to say mad scientists, but the people who were honestly like so impassioned with an idea that they were trying to figure it out themselves, and then getting people on that journey with them is what brought some of the innovation that we use today, you know, to people. So yeah, excited to get in that cockpit, to jumpstart that engine and really like go back to the basics of the power of, you know, decentralization and building stuff in the shadows and bring it to more people. So yeah, it's fun to think about. Gets me, as you can tell, amped. Um, I think it's a good place for us to start to shift to like Catalyst, right? Like Catalyst for us is really that engine that's like jump starting the liquidity in decentralized science. So, you know, Catalyst was born out of a lot of our own experiments and things that we have tried that gave us information and data to get us to where we are today. I think quickly touching on that journey and really like starting with tokenized IP and really tokenizing science as like the crux of our mission, and then, you know, sharing some around how we got to where we are today. But I think we should touch briefly on Molecule, and I know Benji, you shared earlier the part of decentralized science that Molecule is focused on and our mission and vision there. And then we'll turn the corner, get a little bit deeper on Catalyst. But let's start with Molecule and the part of decentralized science we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one way to think about Catalyst is you're on the edge of this valley of death, looking in, and you have a bunch of people on the edge, and they're all looking in and asking themselves, what should we pull out? Right? What's worth pulling out? And there's so many potential projects. There's ideas are in abundance, and capital is of course constrained. And so what we want to help is create a system that allows every individual who wants to participate to be able to pull projects out of that valley of death and help them continue on. And so when we were looking at this from a crypto perspective, back almost like a year ago now, we were looking at things like Friendtech. And Friendtech was leveraging bonding curves in an incredibly interesting way to kind of curate these markets for social, right? It's social finance, basically. Um, but they kind of validated the utility of bonding curves, which are basically these autonomous markets that bootstrap, you know, digital assets, cryptos from zero into something meaningful, right? And they create this market where people can, track the price and look at, oh wow, look at that one. That one's taking off. Maybe I should go see what's going on there. It's basically like the same way that likes on Twitter or X pull out the most valuable content. It's kind of analogous to the same thing in capital markets with a specific asset class. In the case of Friendtech, it was with individuals. And now I think what you're starting to see with things like Pump Fund, which is, if in case anyone's not familiar with Pump.Fund, it's a bonding curve based curation market for meme coins, right? Just a coin with a funny name and a funny picture that's meant to make people laugh. And so I think what Web3 is starting to realize from the perspective of trying to curate markets is bonding curves are super powerful, right? And so I think we realized this early on. I think what we're trying to figure out is how we can get enough people interested in science to help lift these projects out of the valley of death. And who is the most motivated? Who is the most excited about this process? I think that's really the challenge. It's, the model is de-risked to a certain degree, right? We can see that when there's a lot of attention on something like social or like, you know, meme coins, how you can make a really active market. Our challenge right now is to figure out how do we get people interested in science enough, or how do we surface the right projects that get people excited about curating this new market for I mean, we call it IP, but really what it is it's these research programs that could have impact in the real world that we need to bring out. So the Catalyst journey has really been about how do we design the system in a way that gets people excited about funding the research. How do we get people's attention to focus on the projects that are of the greatest value? And how do we get people to take risk where there clearly is risk in early stage biotech research programs, to and to be excited about what comes out on the other side of it. So yeah, here we are. We launched Catalyst a few weeks ago now, and we have our first project listed. And I think we have a lot of work to do, both to get people excited about the work, but also bring them work that is worth getting excited about. And so really, I think what we want to do is co-create this product and this system with the DeSci space and find out, what is interesting to them, what are interesting to patient groups or to science enthusiasts that gets them excited about participating in this market. And that really is the challenge to solve now. The system and the contracts and the tech has been de-risked to a certain degree. Now for us, the challenge is finding things that people want.
Yeah, I think on top of this, it's also, as Benji pointed out, right, finding the projects that are most relevant for people to get interested about science, but I think also building a product that actually resonates with the audience that we're targeting. So for us, it's again still early. I hate this, but yeah, but still, right, like we're trying to figure out what actually is appealing to the Web3 user, but potentially even Web2 users that aren't too deep into crypto, but still want to have touch points with DeSci, right? And are interested to fund research for a certain cure. And I think it's also for us, first of all, a challenge to build the product itself, but then also the messaging around us. How can we make science sexy in a sense for people to actually put the money in and think like this is something I want to contribute, whether it is for reasons of yeah, just philanthropic, right? Like I don't care, I see it as a donation versus people that actually think, okay, might be something valuable in the end that I can take part of. So I think there are different motives and we're trying to find the right balance of it. And of course, the underlying mechanics, as Benji already pointed out, right? The bonding curve that we have in place, playing around with different parameters there as well, different mechanics, just to really find that sweet spot, like that product market fit for Catalyst. And yeah, it's definitely a journey. But again, like we've launched a product, as Benji mentioned, we have the first project live for funding. It's a lot of lessons learned, of course, in the process, but this is what it's all about. I think this is what makes it exciting. And the more hard the problem is to solve, I think the more rewarding is the outcome when you actually achieve this. So I think this is what really, yeah, grinds our gears, I guess you can say in English.
Yeah, definitely. I guess maybe for people not as familiar, it would be worth walking through at a high level, like how Catalyst works, like the end to end experience, like from a research idea getting listed on the platform all the way to having that IPT or intellectual property token and what we would expect or what users could potentially do with that IP token, really what it gives them, what it enables. So, Kevin, maybe you could walk us through. I know that there's a lot that I think keeping it at a high level and just walking through those steps in general, as opposed to getting really deep into, um, maybe the mechanisms of the smart contracts and whatnot behind it, but just in principle, what that end to end journey looks like.
Yes, for sure. I won't get into nitty-gritty details. So how it works is actually quite simple, right? So you can think of it as like a researcher who's seeking funding for their research idea. The idea is for them to be able to come on Catalyst and list their research idea on Catalyst, so providing some information, potentially videos, some credibility as well, right? Some university attached, some credentials as well, for you to be able to actually be recognized as a legit researcher. So you can come on the page as a researcher, list your idea there. Funders that are interested in DeSci or just checking out what's happening on Catalyst are able to discover research projects that they find interesting, maybe for certain research areas as well, right? Longevity, hair loss, you name it. And then as a funder, you have the ability to contribute to this project. So basically, users can come on the site, they can connect their wallet. We allow for both, right? So Web3 wallets, MetaMask, you name them. But we also allow for embedded wallet like social login. So you just need an email and a password. So there's no need to do all of this. Once you're connected, it's pretty straightforward. You can fund the projects via ETH on Base. So Base is the chain of choice without going into too much detail, but it's also super easy to top off your account. So you can do this easily via on-ramp, fiat on-ramp, or you can have funds somewhere else on another wallet. You can just send it to you or just bridge funds. So pretty straightforward. Then basically you're able to fund the research project if the research project reaches its funding goal. What happens after is there is a negotiation period where we are speaking with the university, trying to get an SRA signed, scientific research agreement, also not going into too much detail. Once that is successful, what is happening now is that the users itself are able, like we are minting the IP NFT that goes to the sponsor of this research that guarantees that this research is constantly evolving and developing. And the users that, or the funders that have put the funds into the research in ETH are getting their IP tokens. And the IP tokens are then, I guess, some kind of representation, you could say, that are liquid and tradable, of course, on a DEX after. So if you want to get more, you can get more, or if you don't want them, you can also, yeah, basically sell them. But the goal of the IPT itself is more or less that these are seen as, I guess, some kind of, you can think of them as not ownership, but governance rights towards the IP, meaning that you can vote on licensing of the IP, key research project execution decisions if you want to, even things like proceeds earned from the IP, right? Once there is a drug, you can as a community say, hey, I have a say in this. I can say, okay, should there be royalties? Should there be not? Should the price of the drug be in a certain range? Like these kind of decisions are basically done through this mini community, you could say. So I think a great analogy is always like the citizen or the country. So the you can think of like an IP holder as a citizen of a country, right? Your country doesn't belong to you, but you still have a right to vote within this country on key decisions that are taken on behalf of the country. So I think this is always a nice analogy, just how to put IPTs in this whole context. And yeah, the idea is to, of course, have a lot of projects on there that are interesting for people to fund, and they can choose what they like. And also, of course, the amount that they're willing to contribute to these projects.
Yeah, so it sounds like researchers can list a project on the platform, and then, the end goal would be to have a lot of research projects listed on the platform at any given time. And a funder could come to the platform and browse multiple different projects and see which ones they're interested in supporting. I know the team has done a lot of work in presenting materials in different ways, videos where they're talking about the research, project overviews, and for those who are super interested in the science, like a fully baked out data room. But then letting people fund these projects with their crypto, right, and support them. I know one thing that we've touched on is this bonding curve, and so I think that there's like kind of maybe two different stages to think about, like in the funding the project, like buying into the project, and then once the funding goal is reached, maybe we could talk a bit about like what the flexibility that people have when they're assessing different projects, right, before the bonding curve graduates, if you will. So, what when looking at a project, what if someone changes their mind, or they decide they funded a project, but the bonding curve hasn't collapsed, if you will, and they want to take their funds out. What's that experience like for someone?
Yeah, sure. So I think for us, this was definitely something we've seen across the crypto space, right? So Benji already mentioned you had Frentech, you have Pump.Fun now. But for us, this was a primitive that we actually discussed even earlier. But now we're at a point where we are thinking a bit different about the way we are implying bonding curve. So the way we designed the bonding curve within Catalyst is basically first and foremost, we are incentivizing early participation. So meaning that the earlier you're starting to help the research get to their funding goal. So let's say something just launched and I want to contribute early, I'll get a bigger share of the pro rata IPTs that are being distributed after the negotiation is completed. So there's incentive for people to check this out early and then get involved early on. But at the same time, and this is different to the bonding curves that you, for example, see on Pump.Fun and others, is that we are not fostering speculation under the curve. So we don't treat the research project as something where on behalf of the researcher, people are able to cash out against other people that are funding under the curve. But the main thing for us is really like whatever you put into the project before the funding goal is reached, you're also able to get out pretty much the same. So that means that for us, the bonding curve is like this unwreckable thing. Like users cannot lose their funds in that sense. You cannot crash, where for other platforms this might be quite different. So it's really something where, yeah, you basically are able to get a refund of what you're putting in. And I think this is just for us to also acknowledge the seriousness of this, right? It's not just meme coins that are being pumped for the sake of it, but it's something where there's a serious research behind it. There's trying to solve a problem, and where they're bringing it or presenting it in a way where it's not the next casino, but it's actually something that allows people a fair chance to contribute early, get a bigger share, but at the same time, if they decide, no, I don't want to do this or I want to do something else with my money, then they can just exit it and no questions asked.
Yeah, so people who fund a project can get out what they put in before that funding goal is reached at any time, and I guess they're selling back, right? Like the tokens that they have at the same price they put them in at. So there's no like risk for, you can't really like lose money at that point because you're getting out what you put um, in essence, if you will. In terms of like, I do think one thing that's would be good to touch on is like, there's kind of the time where a project is reaching its funding goal, right? Like, let's say each project has a month where they're on the platform and a funding goal is reached. And then there is this negotiation period. Without getting into like the nuances of the negotiation itself, I do think it's good to help people understand like why there is a negotiation period. Who are we negotiating with? Because there really is this. We talk about these ideas are real world ideas. So there are real world players that we are talking to when we are after the funding goal is reached and the bonding curve graduates, if you will. Like, who are these real world players? Why is there a negotiation period? What conversations are happening at that point before people are able to get their IP tokens? Like, explaining that, and again, not getting into like, I know there's a lot of nuances there, But I just think helping people understand what the players are and what is going on at that moment, that creates a bit of lag, right? Between I funded something and in crypto, we're so used to funding and more of that like instant gratification. What is creating that new step in the process, and why is that, who is that tied to? And like I said, because it's a real world idea with real world players, what's going on at that moment? Maybe Benji, good one for you to take.
Yeah, happy to. And all of this is subject to change, but with our initial design of Catalyst, our thinking is what's limiting the most for projects getting off of the ground is funding, right? So funding is the first thing to de-risk. Let's find out what projects people are excited about funding. Only then, once we know what they're excited about funding, should we then go and speak with the university in our case. So the first projects listed on Catalyst are affiliated with universities. This may change in the future. It may be with companies or it may be with independent scientists in the future. But just because we started with university researchers, let's discuss it there. So the idea is raise the funding. Once you have the funding in hand, you then go and work with the university's technology licensing offices, and sometimes they're called technology transfer offices, sometimes they're called licensing offices. Basically, these are the people at the university who are responsible for taking intellectual property that's developed at the university and helping it launch outside of the university. And so, one thing we talked about earlier in the podcast is this idea that the IP NFT and the IP tokens represent real world intellectual property. In the case of the projects on Catalyst, that intellectual property is represented as a contract, basically between the university and a sponsor. And that sponsor, can be whomever, it can be a DAO, it can be Molecule, it can be anyone who is willing to be the entity that signs that contract with the university, granting future IP rights from the research that's developed. So the reason for this lag period is because the details of that contract have to be negotiated. They're different for every university. Every university wants to be treated like a special snowflake and has different agreements with different terms. And so really what this period is all about is let's find out what projects people are excited about funding. Once we know that they've basically raised sufficient funding to justify funding a project, then we'll go talk to the necessary people at the technology licensing offices at the different universities and secure real world IP. And then we can mint IP tokens that have real world value. And so this lag period, though it may be annoying, it's annoying for everybody involved. Really, on the other side is real world rights that make sure that the token holders have something tangible, that they can point to and say this token isn't just a token on Ethereum. It represents real world legal rights, that justify its value and that back its value. So that's really what this kind of negotiation period is about. It's about securing the real world IP rights to the tokens in the market.
Yeah, and I think it's the way you framed it. It's, something that Catalyst is in a beta, if you will. So we're really in this trying to find the not only what science people want to fund, the right, primitives and mechanisms that allow people to do that. What data points would people want to see to allow them to familiarize themselves with not only the research itself, but also some of this like speculation component. So good to remind people that Catalyst is in its early days. This is all to iterate and to learn and to get closer and closer each time, with every new feature that we ship, right, towards developing the ideal platform that enables people and researchers to come together to, collaborate around science and finding the right mechanisms within the crypto world that do that, and the right ideas that really engage an audience and want them to rally around an idea. So to your point, Benji, there's certainly the approach today, but that's an approach, and there's other things that our team is actively exploring. I think one thing is just for people who are interested in learning more about DeSci, who are passionate about DeSci, who are interested in funding projects, we want this to be built with the community. So we encourage people to share ideas, share different approaches, perspectives, things that they would want to see as we continue to build out Catalyst, and invite people to be a part of this community and build this thing with us, right? Like this is a platform that's, we're hoping to set out there that is something that people will engage with and continue to shape and speak into to help us find the right landing place.
Couldn't have said this better.
So, I know we've said a lot. In terms of like rounding out catalysts, I'm not sure if it's worth covering like any ideas that we have or next steps or things that we've learned from like a launch standpoint. Not sure if there's any other ending remarks in terms of like any other sentiment that we would want to share related to catalysts or things that we've learned in this launch period, um, and things as we look to the future.
Yeah, maybe one final remark, but really crypto is at this very interesting junction where the most dominant narratives and activity are happening on things that create short-term value, right? Things like meme coins, things like NFTs, basically ephemeral products that are entertaining for a short period of time and don't live on. Basically are like weeds in a garden, right? I think what we're trying to do here is plant trees, things that we're proud of as an industry that change the game for an extended period of time and really like build a forest rather than, a garden of weeds, right? Not to criticize the meme coin kind of zeitgeist that exists right now. It's really an interesting validation of crypto mechanics. But really what we're trying to do in the DeSci space is build kind of like a dynasty mindset, right? The work that we're trying to do is done by governments now. We're trying to compete with the government to fund the most valuable, life-changing cures that give people time back and health back. And ultimately, we're all just like we're trying to change a cultural challenge within academia, we're also trying to change a cultural mindset within crypto about, only funding things that create short-term value. We really, in order for us to be successful, and the DeSci space to be successful, we need people to take this long-term dynasty mindset that they want to create something that outlives them. They want to plant trees that they will never that they won't necessarily get to see, um, grow into a massive 100-foot tall sequoia tree, right? Maybe they will, but things will take longer than one crypto cycle to become valuable. And so, are people willing to go on that journey with us? We're not going to make it if, we have to create um, liquidity within, a 2-year cycle that, beats out the meme coins. Sorry, I'm not saying this very well, and this will probably have to be spliced significantly. But really, I think the important thing to walk away with here is we're competing for the mind share of crypto, which is totally enraptured by meme coins and by prices that change so much and cater to really, really widely understandable and addressable markets, meaning the market for jokes. Everyone understands jokes. What we're trying to do is create something that's super impactful long term, but doesn't necessarily enrapture people in the short term. And we're asking people to dig deep and to look for meaning in where they spend their energy. And kind of coming back to what we talked about earlier, Jillian, about wanting to be on the putting your energy toward things that have a positive benefit on the world. We really have the opportunity to do that. If you listen to any of the researchers, their actual stories, look into their actual work, it may be risky, and it certainly is. But what they're doing is objectively impactful, right? And they are building things that can change humanity, right? Not saying that it's a guarantee. It's by no means a guarantee, but it has the chance. And, I want to bet on that. And I'm excited about putting my energy towards something that, can create this potential long-term value. And I think all we ask is people to dig deep and see whether they're excited about, funding something that's for the long term and whether they're patient enough to wait and see the impact that can be created from deep long-term work, and see what happens when you basically can pull projects out of the valley of death and see what's on the other side. And what could be on the other side is, game changing cures that, may not help us today, but can potentially help our parents and hopefully ourselves in the future. And how rewarding would that be if you were part of creating a therapeutic that helps a family member, a friend, or even yourself in the future. I don't think we often like think about ourselves as old people who will be fighting for our lives and for our health in the future. But if you can have that mindset of, I want to fund things that are going to help me in the future, um, and at least, my grandparents or parents today, how rewarding that will be. And yeah, we're just inviting people on that journey. And yeah, we're excited about fighting the good fight.
Here to fight the good fight with you. I think the closest thing I can relate to, as I shared earlier, was being a parent, becoming a parent. And, really quickly I realized my, I guess my mortality, because like someday I won't be here. And so making sure to think about building a world, shaping a world for the next generation, for my kids, and also making sure too that I realized in an instant that life changes, can change with a phone call, can change with one doctor's appointment, can change waking up one day, and thinking about creating a future where that medication, that product that I might need, a loved one might need, could be there because when they need it, because we played an active role in that, and opening up new funding mechanisms to accelerate, science and help more products, more molecules, compounds over that valley of death. But yeah, I think, it's a big mission, and it's an important mission and impactful mission, and one that have all been focused on, but also invite more people to help support us in this mission, because we can't have this impact without a community of people really rallying around this idea, this product, this vision. So yeah, it's the first step of a journey, but I think, as we all know, like we're more than committed to finding the right way, the right path, and this is the first step. But with that, I know we've covered a lot. I already have like 10 more questions I could ask, so probably a part 2 coming would be good. But just want to leave people for people who are interested in learning more about Catalyst, learning more about Molecule, really the best way to get involved is to join our Discord, join our community, connect with our team. We are open to, feedback, ideas, engagement, involvement. So if you're not already, join our Discord. One way that we are capturing feedback right now, so as we shared, Catalyst is live. You can go check out the first research project on the platform. You can fund, the first research project on the platform if that's something you're interested in. So it is out there in the world, but we are capturing feedback. So one thing that I would share is we do have a program called Catalyst Quests, and this quest is really an opportunity for people to check out these projects and provide feedback on the information that we're presenting, that the platform is presenting. Is this the type of project you're interested in? Is this the type of information you're interested in? What other features would you like to see? So another great way for people to get involved is to join Catalyst Quests and share feedback along the way as they engage with different projects listed on the platform. But with that, I guess, guys, I've signed you up for a part 2. So part 2 coming.